I oftentimes have these moments where I just am overwhelmed. Like, this is so crazy that I am so young and I am prioritizing health at such a young age.
You're 19 going into this, posting your health data and having a Netflix show. How do you feel with that being so publicly, and how do you deal with that?
Talmage Johnson, son of longevity pioneer Bryan Johnson, is a key part of the Blueprint protocol.
Putting it to the test at a younger age and helping explore how early optimization can shape long-term health and performance.
My dad and I have a better relationship than anyone I know. And most people think that he's forcing me to do this. I prefer seeing my data because I trust the data much more than I trust any subjective feeling that I have. There is the test that could track your duration of nighttime erections.
I've never spoken to so many family members about their erections in one podcast, but here we go.
It's a Johnson thing. When most people look at this nighttime erection thing and they react very strongly by saying you shouldn't post this, it's not really a reflection of the post. It's a reflection of the cultural and social norms of this taboo topic.
Have you ever had a relationship?
I haven't had a serious relationship before. I have an extraordinary relationship with my dad.
Are you blocking that out?
Right now, in this moment, I have the relationship box checked already. And there are other things that get me very, very excited about life. It is a cult, given it's viewed as sort of crazy according to today's standards. But history has shown that today's novelties are tomorrow's norms. If you ask the question, do you want to live forever? It's the same question as, do you want to live tomorrow?
Firstly, I want to say thank you to tuning in and listening to the show. It means a huge amount. And connecting with all of you is something that I absolutely love as part of this journey of growing the show. One of my biggest goals of 2025 is doubling the reach of this show. And I can't do that without your support. So I would love to ask you a favor. If you can press subscribe or follow on whichever platform you listen to. This helps us reach more people. And for me, elevating women in science is so fundamental and ethical and scientific information. So if you feel the show empowers you and gives you the information that you've been seeking, I would love to ask a favor in return and to hit that subscribe button and help me reach the goal that I've set for the show of 2025. Thank you. Talmage, welcome to Live Well, Be Well.
Thanks for having me here.
I am so happy to be here with you in LA because I interviewed your dad. It probably was about 2 years ago now, but sadly I didn't get to LA for that one. We were virtually. And I remember opening up the Times newspaper, which is quite a, independent broadsheet in the UK, and seeing this picture of you and your dad holding blood.
Like this?
This.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just stopping it by tracks, wanting to know, what was this? And immediately messaged your dad and said, I'm a scientist. I'd love to get you on. I've just been reading about Blueprint. I'm quite fascinated that you're building this publicly. And he was amazing. He came on and he was so open in his story to me. I think we were one of the first people, especially in the UK, to speak to him. So it's amazing that 2 years later, you're sat here with me and you're now on Blueprint.
Yep.
So how long have you been doing Blueprint for? Which is, is it for you the same 2 million anti-aging, or is it a bit less? How much are you spending on Blueprint, and at what degree are you doing it to your father, Bryan Johnson?
I've been doing Blueprint for about 3 years now, similar to when he started it. And Blueprint is not necessarily spending $2 million on your body per year. It's rather a system that you follow that's designed to get optimal health. And so for me, I'm 19, and a lot of what my dad does is to reverse aging damage and to slow his speed of aging. But for me, I haven't accumulated much aging damage given my young age. So the priority is just basics of sleep, diet, exercise, and that's my form of Blueprint. But what he does, a lot of it is to reverse aging damage. And that requires a lot more expensive therapies. But he's now gotten to a point where the majority of what he does comes from the power laws of diet, sleep, and exercise.
So how much do you think, on average, yours will cost a year?
I mean, it's honestly not very much. If you practically look at it like a sleep tracker and then eating healthy foods, going to a gym, like a gym membership, it's very low cost when it comes to money. The hard part is being consistent and being disciplined about it. And so most people, when they want to get better health, they say, what pill do I need to take? Or should I take rapamycin or NAC or NMN? And it's typically people want there to be like a single solution, but it's really just an avoidance of the pillars of diet, sleep, and exercise that most people don't want to do. And so arguably the $2 million a year part, that's not the hard part. The hard part is being consistent about avoiding bad foods, not smoking, not drinking, going to bed on time. Those are the hardest things for people to do.
It's interesting because although, the statement of don't die that is kind of branded across a lot of the t-shirts that Bryan wears, I can understand his thought premise to wanting to reverse his aging from building Braintree and getting to a certain point where his health was in a bad state and wanting to reverse that. For you, what's your outcome to this? Because as you said, you haven't had very much aging. You're young, you've got so much going for you. What's your mindset around, what's your approach to this?
When my dad first started Blueprint, he always did cool projects in my perspective. I always admired what he did. And Blueprint was another project that he was doing. And he didn't tell me I needed to do it, but he said, hey, Talmage, this is something I'm doing. You should check it out. And so I started following up on what he was doing, his diet protocol, his exercise protocol, his sleep. And then I became hooked with it. So I started wearing a sleep tracker. I started working out every day. And I basically built this internal feedback loop that I am much happier and fulfilled in life when I'm healthy. And it didn't come as a result of him telling me to or me getting the parental approval to, but rather me doing it on my own and experiencing the benefits. So it definitely wasn't something that I saw and I said, oh, I know this is going to be good for me. It was something that I experimented with, had ups and downs, and then ultimately arrived to the conclusion that I am much better off in life living this way.
Well, I feel like I know that all of your data is being shared publicly, which is really interesting. Like all of everything that you, Kate now, who's kind of doing the XX, the Blueprint, the women's side, and Bryan, it's all kind of, it's a huge human experiment. I feel like yours is going to be one of the richest because you've started it so young. To actually see the results. I'm not sure how long you will do this for. Maybe you'll get to 40 and go wild. You might change your thought process, but you're starting at an age really where it's a very clean age to start. How does it feel to maybe be the potentially oldest living man on earth?
Yeah, it's very easy to normalize to the world one is in. And so when I'm living with my dad, and in our world, it's normal to be healthy. There's no junk food around the house whatsoever. And we rarely go out to restaurants. And sometimes I have these moments where I see parts of the world I don't typically see or aren't exposed to as much. And it reminds me that, oh, this is pretty weird and out of the norm. And I oftentimes have these moments where I just am overwhelmed. Like, this is so crazy that I am so young and I am prioritizing health at such a young age and consistent with it, because I look at it as Blueprint is sort of compounding health. And so a lot of people like to compound money, and then it basically has exponential growth over the years. And I'm viewing this as the same thing, making a long-term investment in my future self. And I acknowledge that it's an incredibly unique opportunity to be told about the world of health at such a young age. And I don't want to hesitate in jumping to that.
So 16 is when you started Blueprint, is that right? No,
Yeah.
17.
16 is when I was introduced to the idea and began doing it. And there's definitely a learning curve where before my dad became tight about it, during his depression, he had what he called Evening Bryan. And Evening Bryan was the version of himself that would come out from 5 to 10 p.m. at night. And he would basically have to deal with all the stress from work that day, from a deteriorating relationship, from sleep deprivation. And the only way to soothe himself was food. And so Evening Bryan was a negative force for all other Bryans. So if Evening Bryan came out, then Morning Bryan would feel groggy. Workout Bryan wouldn't really feel like doing it. Dad Bryan wouldn't be as tolerant of kids. And so Evening Bryan was this issue that was basically made every other part of his life hard. And eventually, after enough iterations of having that cookie or this is the last time, my dad ultimately came to the conclusion that it's never, ever worth it. And so for me, I went through the exact same process. I call my version Rascal Talmage.
Rascal?
Yes. I call him Rascal Talmage because he's present not just in the evening, but through the entire day. And it's funny because I went through the exact same process as my dad. And fortunately, he had went through the same thing. And so he basically knew the situation I was in with more clarity than I did. And he didn't fault me for it. He didn't get after me for it. He was very empathetic, understanding, and supportive. And eventually I was able to wrangle Rascal Talmage, and now he no longer bears any influence in my life. And now I'm at this steady baseline. So I started a few years ago, and during the beginning phase, there was definitely a process of adjusting. And now I'm at a steady baseline where I don't have intense emotional highs or lows. It's just constant.
I find that quite interesting because I feel with the highs and the lows, that's also part of the human experience. And maybe not deep lows of living in depression, because that's different. But the highs and lows of life, I feel, is what makes it so rich.
Yeah. So there's two parts to that. One is that in terms of health, it's if you have a bad night of sleep, you're much more susceptible to being irritable, or you're basically a lesser version of yourself. And so in a way, there's a bunch of things that are very difficult to mitigate, and we will inevitably experience highs and lows in life. Maintaining health is one way of mitigating unnecessary lows and becoming a more stable person. And the second thing is that oftentimes people justify their self-destructive behaviors by saying, life is meant to have ups and downs, or we're meant to experience extreme pain, or we're meant to experience great happiness. And so it's not to say that's wrong, but it's a justification they use for their unhealthy behaviors. So this is not to say it eliminates all emotional roller coasters in life, but it allows someone to reach a point of equilibrium that gives them greater control over their life instead of feeling like they're a victim of their life.
I agree with that. I agree that it can bolster stress a lot more when you're in a much more of a homeostasis place with your health. But do you still get that emotional high, that emotional richness that can come with the ups and downs? Do you still feel that you can get that?
Yeah, I do. I think that if anything, I wouldn't say that being at this baseline has made me experience life any less. I think it's given me greater capacity to experience it. And I think that prioritizing health just eliminated an unnecessary way of experiencing highs and lows. But of course, it doesn't eliminate other ways of experiencing different emotional experiences in life. So it was really just a matter of picking which battles I wanted to have and experiencing the battles of the regrets of eating junk food. I did not want that trade-off.
I've spent years in the fashion industry, but also years as a scientist, trying to understand how our bodies are meant to move. And I'll be honest with you, most shoes are terrible for our feet. I know this firsthand. For years, I wore the wrong shoes, ones that looked great, but in reality gave me persistent back pain and messed up toenails. I searched everywhere for a pair of shoes that wouldn't just support my feet, but would also help them heal. And I struggled because most healthy shoes don't exactly scream style. And then I found Vivo Barefoot, something that finally looks good and actually works. I wear mine with cargo pants, awesome leather trousers, a crisp white tee, and my favorite sunnies. Not only do they feel great, but they really fit my style. Wide, thin, and flexible, these shoes allow my feet to move naturally the way they're supposed to. And the best part, just 6 months of barefoot shoes can increase your foot strength by 60%, helping to undo the years of damage from conventional footwear. Now, if you've ever had the same problem and tried to find a shoe that supports your body without sacrificing style, then this is it. Try Vivo Barefoot for yourself and feel the difference. You can get 20% off if you use the code LWBW20 at vivobarefoot.com, where the T's and C's apply. Trust me, your feet, your back, and your outfit will thank you.
So I want to get into the 3 kind of core pillars in a second, which was sleep, exercise, and nutrition, which is kind of your blueprint at the moment of like what you're sticking to. But so I don't jump too far, pre going to live with your dad, kind of coming into this lifestyle, you were a Mormon. And I watched Don't Die on Netflix with you and your dad and saw what that must have felt like. I have no experience of what you went through, but seeing the tough decision that you had to make to leave and go and live with your dad, who left at 34. What was the moment of leaving Mormonism and going to live with your dad like? What was that moment in your mind when you said, I'm going to do this? How did you get to that conclusion?
There were 2 moments that I can remember. But to back it up a little bit, right after my dad left the church, or my parents divorced and he left the church, there was this question, who do you side with? Do you side with the mom who's in the church, or do you side with the dad who left it? And when your entire community and extended family and upbringing were in the church, then the dad's kind of the one outside looking in. And so for a few years, my siblings and I had this distrust for him because he didn't check the religion box. And over time, he would visit us on the weekends, and I began building a rapport with him. We began hanging out, and one of the ways we did this was whenever he'd come out for the weekend, I would have schoolwork to do, and I didn't want to spend time doing schoolwork. I wanted to spend time with him, and so he basically sat down with me, and we did schoolwork together, and he had this ability to move through it incredibly quickly, despite not knowing any of the contents of my classes. And so that was the first example of, oh, he's actually pretty smart in this area and he's really good. And so this eventually extended to other areas of life where he started giving me advice. And typically when I would use his advice, it would be pretty accurate. And so over the years, I began building a rapport with him and began to trust him more. And eventually I had the question, what if he's right about religion? And so there was one day when he came out for a weekend, and it was a Sunday, so it was church, and my siblings went to church and I stayed at home just because I wanted to spend more time with them. And we were having a conversation, and the moment just hit me like, oh shit, it may not be true. And it was the first time I had ever considered that possibility. And as soon as I hit that realization, it led to a cascade of events. And the summer before my senior year, I went out to California we would spend a couple weeks with him during the summer. And the idea was tossed up, like, what if you just came out here? And it was inconceivable to me at the time because the default assumption had been stay in the religious community. Like, I can't get out until after college, but I had meaning to. And there's this idea called the Gordian knot, where you have a seemingly complex problem, and then you find the quickest solution to it. And it felt like a Gordian knot moment where I was building this up to be some big thing, but the reality is just leave and go live with them, because I knew that after my senior year of high school, I would be going to college, and it would be much more difficult to live with him. So as soon as that idea was entertained, I stopped at nothing to make it happen. And so I left my religious community and I lived with him for a year, for my senior year of high school. And to this day, it is undoubtedly the best decision I've ever made. I have never looked back on it once.
Do you still have a relationship with your family, your siblings?
Yeah, I do have a relationship with them. There is a bit of a rift that's created when there's, similar to how we viewed my dad when he first left, there's that rift there. And I think I have fallen into this very similar situation. And so fortunately, we have this history and familial bond that allows us to basically acknowledge the differences and still be family. At the same time, there's also this underlying, we don't align on everything. And so it's sometimes very difficult to break those barriers.
Do you think kind of growing up with that mindset helped keep a disciplined mindset for where you are now?
You're saying the mindset of leaving the religion or having that drive to leave transfers over to the desire to pursue health?
think the connection to Mormonism, the going to the church, that there's rules that you follow, that there's beliefs, there's an ingrained community that all believe something that might be quite different to the outside, and that you're all very close. That's like, there's a disciplined mindset to that, that you grow up in. Someone who doesn't have faith doesn't grow up in that mindset. It's very different. And now you have a very disciplined mindset just in something quite different.
It's a good point. Maybe I had basically a framework that told me how to live, what morals to have, what would happen in the afterlife, who I should marry, who my friend should be, what I should do. And after leaving that, I had a void of nothing. And so maybe in a way, this was a replacement of that void. So same approach, just a different outlet. I haven't thought about it that way. That's like, when you really boil it down, it makes a lot of sense. That would be the case.
Yeah. Because I think my mindset of when I was 19, I was modeling. I just landed in New York from Paris, and I kind of was open to this crazy world of opportunities. I mean, literally, it was probably the opposite of Blueprint. There was no sleep, there was a lot of partying, there was no routine. Hearing how you speak and the discipline that you have to do this is, for me, something that I find really interesting. And I think growing up in something that had very strict values, that had a very clear path, that was kind of maybe ingrained from a child, there is transferable skills. Mm-hmm. So let's go to now, because I find where you are and what you're doing really interesting. You kind of said it's actually not expensive what I'm doing. It's not to my dad's degree. So let's go through nutrition, which is my wheelhouse. So what does a day of Talmage at the current need look like with new nutrition protocol? Because I think you've gone fully vegan now. Am I
Yes,
correct?
fully vegan.
Because you were having meat before, I think. I remember the super veggie was like substituted with chicken.
Yeah.
So what does the day look like for you now? And how is it different to Bryan's routine?
So I've done a lot of experimentation over the years. For a while, I did meal prep of nutty pudding, and then I incorporated super veggie. And the initial version of super veggie was this pureed version. And so I had a very hard time trying it. And so I couldn't exactly replicate my dad's protocol. So I added chicken to it, and it was a better combo. But the point is, I've gone through a lot of different iterations, and I'm continually fine-tuning it. But as of today, I consume about 2,300 calories per day. So I'm in caloric restriction, and I am doing that because I want to experiment to see how it affects my pace of aging. And there's been studies showing that caloric restriction is linked to longevity. And specifically for pace of aging, given I'm so young, there's actually it's called the Rejuvenation Olympics. And there's a leaderboard for pace of aging who has the lowest. And right now, I believe my dad's number 3 or something. It's 0.57. And so...
Who's number 1?
The funny part is that, so my dad's spoken to the people who are like number 1 and number 2 or who have beaten him. And he asks, like, what do you do? And they're like, nothing. They don't do anything. And it's likely due to genetic factors.
I was about to say genetics.
They hit the lottery and they don't need to do anything.
Is Bryan not pissed off by that?
I think, like, ironically, I think he looks at it and he's like, he basically sees the potential in it. Like, if someone is genetically equipped to have a low speed of aging, if we're looking at the future and potentially genetic engineering, like, what's possible with that? So he did this where he posts his biomarkers and he told the world, like, beat me. He doesn't get threatened or he doesn't get competitive by it. He's like, he wants people to beat him. And so a fun goal actually that I have is recently on X, he posted his world's 44 best biomarkers, world's best biomarkers. And typically in the anti-aging community, there's a lot of dissension over what is and what isn't good to have, like what numbers you want. It's like a religion of sorts. And
it's a cult.
Exactly. And so he chose the biomarkers that most everyone agrees on. Like, it's good to have low inflammation, good to have low speed of aging, good to have high muscle volume. And so he posted it and he basically made this claim, I'm quantitatively the most measured man in the world and the healthiest man in the world. And so I posted on my X, I had a goal of basically beating him. And so I've now started to track a lot of those same metrics and specifically pace of aging, which is why I'm trying caloric restriction.
So where are you now?
I haven't tested in a few years. So I just took my test recently and I'm waiting to get the results back.
What do you think you are?
I actually did a poll. I asked people what they thought I was.
But what do you think you are?
I try not to.
No, come on. Don't push this question. What do you think?
Like, I don't want to create a guess because as soon as I create an expectation, then if I get something higher than what I want, then I basically don't want to disappoint myself. So I view it less as a culmination of what I've done already and more as a baseline that I can use to guide future actions.
Okay.
So I'll post it when I get it, but the goal is basically to get below 0.5.
Okay.
And no one's done that so far.
So we want you to be, well, we don't. This is me saying that I want you to.
Yeah.
I don't. You want to get below 0.5.
Yeah. No one in the world has measurably gotten less than 0.5. And so
this is the goal.
Yes.
Now, the big thing I think that shocks people, and it shocked me when I first spoke to Bryan, was his eating window is kind of 4 hours or 4 to 5 hours. What's your eating window?
It's a very similar window.
Oh, wow. So you've reduced it.
Yeah, it's 4 to 6 hours. I have my first meal around 8 a.m. and last meal sometime between 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. And it takes a while to get used to it because we're not used. The majority of people have dinner, or at least in the US, around 5, 6, 7 p.m., close to bedtime. And
5 is not close to bedtime.
It's relative, yes. And so people are uncomfortable with the feeling of being hungry before going to bed. And it takes some time, but I began to associate being hungry with good sleep. And so the reason why I've shortened my eating window and pushed it earlier in the day is because I started tracking my sleep. And I found that when I eat earlier in the day, and specifically a lighter last meal, then my sleep stats are much better. So it's also to our question earlier about tracking our sleep. So I eat earlier in the day and then I do a combination of fruits, veggies, nuts, berries, legumes, plant-based protein powders, creatine, collagen, and basically the full supplement stack that Blueprint has built.
And how many supplements?
I do, I believe, 10 pills per day.
Okay. Because when I first interviewed Bryan, he did 100.
Yeah. The idea behind creating Blueprint products is that when Blueprint first went viral, most people said, like, the most common response was, this is too expensive and too complicated, make it easy. And so the plan was not to make it a business venture, but there was a high demand from people that basically to make perfect health easy and affordable. And so that launched the Blueprint company. And the goal is for it to be the most nutritious protocol in human history and have the data to back it up.
You finish around 2?
Yeah, around noonish.
Around noonish, okay.
Yeah.
And you symbolize being hungry with better night's sleep.
Yes, it's like hunger isn't the issue. It's the association that we attribute to hunger. And so the most common association people have is, oh, I should eat. But when I think of hunger, I associate it with a lower resting heart rate. My digestive system has gone through all of the necessary processes so my body can focus on sleeping. So it's just a matter of shifting your perspective of how you look at it.
I do have to say that if I don't eat, so this morning I fasted because I just didn't have time. And by the end of my first interview, I had such bad brain fog. Like I couldn't compute as well as I normally do. It's definitely going to be hard, I think, for people to digest it in the sense of how you're talking about it. I'm trying to think about what the listeners might be kind of thinking about right now or saying and how they're going to approach this, because I guess a lot of them would say, well, I get so much pleasure for coming home and still having a healthy meal, but not feeling hungry.
Yeah.
And so to try and making it more adaptable to what you said, like, well, how can I do this in a way that's achievable? For most people, finishing at 12 takes away maybe a lot of the joy that food can bring and the hunger pain that might not be so fun, to compensate for a better night's sleep.
Yeah, Bryan has said this all the time, but, oh, my dad. But yeah, I use his name. I don't have an exact format for it. It's interchangeable right now. But
say your dad.
My dad, yeah. He says this all the time. I say it too, but people don't have to do what we do. So you don't have to stop eating at 11 a.m. or noon. You just have to take small steps in a more healthy direction. So one frame of mind I like to use is, instead of eating 3 bowls of cereal, eat 2 bowls of cereal. It doesn't matter what the current state is. It just matters the trajectory. And so if that means people eat right up until bedtime, try stopping your last meal an hour before bedtime, or 2 hours before bedtime, or 3 hours, but experiment. But most people think they have to go all in. That's not the case. Oftentimes that launches people in the complete opposite direction. Mm-hmm. And so I've gotten to a point where I thrive in this extreme, but for a lot of people, it's the best method is baby steps. And that's how I got into it initially. So definitely not an all or nothing pursuit. You don't have to stop eating at 12 p.m. You don't have to be in caloric restriction. You don't have to be vegan. It's a matter of taking small steps that are manageable towards a healthier lifestyle and then experiencing those benefits and then deciding from there, do I want to go further with this or am I happy with where I'm at?
I agree with that for sure. And I think I'm very interested in the nutrition side, being a scientist, being a nutritionist. I think the hard thing that and maybe this is coming from a woman's perspective and it's different because you're men and maybe you don't see this, but do you feel there's part of an addiction to it? Because there was a big rise and there's kind of a new area that's coming up called orthorexia, which is about kind of very clean eating and not going off that path. And I then worked and specialized in that area. And I saw that when I was modeling, that I would be scared to come off very healthy food. You know, to have a day that I was grabbing some chips or, which I didn't normally do, but when I did, I'd feel like really ashamed and really guilty about it because my body was a temple and I earned my money via that. And then I went and studied nutritional science and understood the impact of food and how it fueled your body. And I still eat very healthy, but I don't eat restrictively. And there's a difference of mindset there for me. And I maybe was around at your age, a very similar mindset of discipline, like heavy discipline. And so I guess that's what I'm trying to understand, because there's a lot of it from what I've studied and researched on in this because this is kind of the very specific area that I look at as the psychology of it. And I find that we can become very restrictive and it can be quite an addictive mindset to be in. What's like your take on that?
Food is very complicated. When we talk about the pillars of prioritizing health, the first step is typically sleep, and then exercise, and then diet. Because when you sleep well, then you have more energy to work out. And when you work out, you feel like eating healthy food. And food it's so complicated because it's like a drug, and you can't cold turkey. You have to microdose it in a way. And it's a very ambiguous line to walk. And so there are tons of different approaches to one achieving their healthiest state. So it could be mindful eating or not being restrictive or being incredibly disciplined or setting a bunch of rules for yourself. So there are lots of different paths towards health. I don't think there's a best one. I think there's just different options depending on how one can have the highest success rate. So for me, the easiest path is to be completely disciplined 100% because I can't give myself any wiggle room. If I do, then it goes all over the place. And so I need very strict guidelines that I can follow, and it reduces the complexity. But for other people, that's unrealistic and it doesn't work for them. And it's just easier to be mindful about what they eat. So
yeah,
I don't think there's a singular best path, but rather choosing among the different ways one can go about it and doing what's best and what is most suited for them.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wouldn't feel ethical if I didn't raise that conversation around food. You know, I think food I believe is hyper complex, it's hyper emotional. And I think it can be an addiction. It can be a health addiction at the same time. Do you feel that that's an analogy that you connect to? That it's quite an addictive space? Like, say if you did end up eating later, how would you feel a lot of shame and guilt? Or would you go, okay, that day I just messed up?
It probably stems from eating late or eating that cookie or staying up enough times where at a certain point, I come to the conclusion that it's never, ever worth it. And no matter what, I don't want to make that trade-off because there's never been a time where I've done it and I tell myself, I'm glad I did that. And so based on the historical data that I've had for myself, I've never walked away feeling better about myself that I did it. And so I would prefer to learn from that and not put myself in that scenario again.
So sleep. We spoke about this for the Substack on the Compassionate Cure, my 5 questions. I mentioned like what was one of the most kind of smallest changes that you've made that's had the biggest impact. And you said my sleep routine.
Mm-hmm.
And you then said how I did that was by tracking my sleep. Something that I was into was tracking my sleep. And then I would find that it would really affect my mindset. If I thought I woke up feeling great, and then I checked my kind of data and it told me that I actually had a very low sleep score. Other times, obviously, if I thought I wasn't feeling great, but it told me I had a great sleep score, it would probably make me feel a bit better. So it worked both ways. But over time, I was like, how helpful is this? Am I becoming disconnected to actually just what I'm feeling like? Am I relying on data to tell me how I should feel? Or am I connecting to how I'm feeling? I think that's a really interesting space that we're in right now because we have a gadget for everything. And for you, the data is really important to be able to optimize what you're doing. How do you respond to that type of like thought process? Like you're having data to tell you how you're feeling as opposed to connecting to what your body's telling you.
Yeah, it seems like the underlying goal is to get better, high quality sleep. And there are many vectors that someone can take to get to that. And some people, like you said, in your experience, if you track your sleep and you think you slept well and you look at your data and apparently you didn't sleep well, then it can have a psychological effect where you feel more tired throughout the day because the data told you versus how you actually feel. The reason why I do the data tracking is because it's a numbers game. And so similar to capitalism, it's a game with numbers. It's how much money do you have? And when humans are given numbers, we'll play the game. And so I viewed tracking my sleep as a similar thing where I basically had numbers that I wanted to hit. And if I hit certain numbers, then it would be indicative that I would be getting higher quality sleep. And so I found that if I don't track my sleep, I am much more likely to neglect it because I don't see the lifetime repercussions of it. Because you can see bad data the following morning, but you may not completely feel that you're not sleeping well, or people normalize to sleep deprivation and they say, oh, I'm fine, but they don't realize they're blinded by their sleep deprivation. And it's only when they get a good night of sleep that they remember, oh, I have been sleep deprived. And so it's similar to food. It's complicated. And there are many different ways where people can get optimal sleep. You just have to find the method that works best for you, whether it be using data and numbers to help you reach your goals, or if it's not wanting to see the data and focusing on how you feel instead. So different paths work for different people. I prefer seeing my data because I trust the data much more than I trust any subjective feeling that I have.
I trust myself more than my data. What time do you go to bed?
I go to bed 9 p.m.
Okay.
every night.
And Brian's is 8 or 8:30?
8:30. Yeah. We typically go to bed around the same time. Wake up around the same time.
And you wake up at 4?
I wake up a little later. I wake up at 6 because in your younger years, you do need a little more sleep. So I wake up around 6.
And what's your kind of, this is something that I think is really important, your wind down routine? Because most of us will go to bed looking at our phones, right? So what's your wind down routine? How do you get ready for bed?
I allocate 1 hour for my wind down routine. We have a red light in the house. So when it gets later in the day, we turn the light on and we turn all other lights on the ceiling or white lights down. And so it's this very calm environment where there isn't too many stimulants. And then I do my bedtime routine, take a hot shower, brush teeth, etc. And then I basically either listen to an audiobook or I meditate. But I know that when I don't have a wind down routine, my thoughts are racing all night long. Like if I work until 8:30 p.m. and then fall asleep by 9 p.m., even though I have got to bed on time and will be in bed for enough time throughout the night, I know that I'll primarily be in light sleep and not necessarily in deep sleep or REM sleep, where that's the restorative stages. So it's almost that my wind down routine is as important as going to bed on time, because if I don't have that wind down routine, then I get much lower quality sleep.
And you just said until you work till 8:30. Actually, before I ask you this question, I want to ask this other one because it's just come up because it's to do with nighttime. I saw a post today and you walked in and you said, "Have you seen it?" Which is what your dad posted about your nighttime erections. I can't believe I'm asking you this question. I also spoke to your dad about erections. I've never spoke to so many family members about their erections in one podcast, but here we go.
It's a Johnson thing.
It's a Johnson thing.
Yeah.
It's like kind of the natural conversation to have around a dinner table. You have better health data on your erections than your father. So when you're beating him in that game, it was that you're 2 minutes longer than nighttime erections, right? So for most people, they might feel that I'm asking this just in a quite natural way. But how do you feel about this being posted publicly online? Like, because there comes to a point where I think, okay, your dad is older, wiser, because he's lived a longer time and maybe he's gone through a lot being an entrepreneur, selling Braintree. And he's maybe got more resilience to this, and I guess for him, he's maybe built up more of how to deal with this. You're 19 going into this, posting your health data and having a Netflix show, and then kind of saying about your erections, nighttime erections. Like, how do you feel with that being so publicly, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I actually proposed to him that we post it. So for a long time, I was focusing on the basics of diet, sleep, and exercise. And then there were other tests like blood tests or microplastics or pace of aging. And then there was the test that could track your duration of nighttime erections. And so I basically wanted to baseline myself everywhere. And
how do you even track that? Do you just wear something?
You just there's like a string that you can just wrap around. And then when the penis engorges, then it can detect the distance at which it engorges. And then it considers an erection. And then it basically monitors that throughout the night. And so he basically posted about his erections, and there was a wild set of responses, to say the least. And it's funny because to me, it's so normal, because I admire him a lot, and I view what he's doing as incredibly cool. And he cares about the opinions of those in the 25th century, not the opinions of those right now. And so it basically gives him leadway to push these boundaries. And so I think in a way, he's almost created this cultural sandbox for me that basically says, here are the world's social, cultural norms, and here's how they affect you in ways that you can't even see. And most people fall into that. So when most people look at this nighttime erection thing and they react very strongly by saying you shouldn't post this, it's not really a reflection of the post. It's a reflection of the cultural and social norms of this taboo topic. And so the idea behind it is basically feeling out this new space of what is and what isn't acceptable. And so now we're trying to say, as much as it seems taboo right now, it doesn't necessarily have to be weird for people to track their nighttime erections because it's a good indicator of overall health and sexual health. And so,
but those comments must affect you in some way. I can't believe that they just they don't sit in your brain at all.
I can't help but embrace a similar way he thinks, where people's comments about you aren't about you. They're just a reflection of the people who made those comments. And so I view it more as a society level therapy session. And so we've seen in the past when someone does something outrageous in that time and place, people can get a lot of hate. But if you put them up to the test of time, those things that initially got a lot of pushback slowly became incorporated into society and became the new norm. And so I view it in a similar light, where it's not unreasonable that it becomes a norm for people to track their health metrics, including erections. Like, I like to think that like people my age, because if I tell someone my age, go to bed on time, they're like, no, I'm not doing that. And then I'm like, okay, track your nighttime erections, see what number you get. And then if they get really low numbers, they don't want that. And so it's almost like a new form of social currency for teenagers, where
beat my erection time.
Exactly. Like, everyone wants to have good boners. That's what people want, and what parental relationships could be like. And my dad and I have a better relationship than anyone I know. And most people think that he's forcing me to do this, or there's some behind the scenes that's happening that we aren't telling the world. But it's really just a reflection of like what we do. It's almost as if anything we do, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is people's response to it. The response is more telling.
So nighttime erections, they're doing pretty well.
Yeah, I've only tracked it once.
Okay.
And I haven't specifically tried to increase them at all. So it's just a baseline.
And then the last bit that I want to ask about is exercise. What's the protocol here? How many times a day do you exercise? Like, what does this look like for Talmage?
Yeah, the cool thing about exercise is there have been studies showing that it's not really as important what specifically you do, but more how much you do. And so I believe it is 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week, so 30 minutes per day, 5 days a week, and then 75 minutes of more vigorous exercise. And that's typically a pretty good starting point. And for me, I love it. So I train.
So that's how you look at your exercise regime. Yours.
That's how people can look at it.
But what's yours?
For me personally, I love exercise. It's a bit of an obsession for me. And so I work out 6 days per week. I do strength training 6 days per week. I do zone 2 cardio 4 days per week, and then HIIT training twice per week. So trying to increase VO2 max, and then also doing a push-pull leg split, and also incorporating flexibility. So when I wake up in the morning and I haven't worked out, I have an itch.
Is that the first thing you do?
First thing I do.
Do you have coffee? Do you have anything before?
I have a little morning drink. It's called Longevity Mix.
Of course it is.
Yeah, part of the product line that my dad made. But I have that and the pills, and then I jump straight to my workout.
When I watched the documentary of you doing this with Bryan, firstly, I loved the bond that you have. And do you feel that this is going to, in 20 years, be what most people will be doing? How long do you think people would take to adapt to the blueprint life?
The honest answer is I have no idea. Things are changing so quickly, especially with AI. It's making it very hard to predict even months ahead of time. And so there's also this don't die. The words were first uttered, I believe, 1.5 years ago. And now it's grown into a global movement with thousands of people who want to be a part of it. And so I definitely think it has the potential of being on the same level as something like Christianity or
Wow.
Islam or Judaism or Buddhism. So it definitely,
So do you think it's like a religion?
it is a
I mean, I
religion.
saw that, and this is me because I saw it on your Instagram saying it's a cult.
Yeah, it is. And it's oftentimes cult or religion, they can have a certain connotation associated with them. And so we are fully embracing it. Like, yes, it is a cult. And it's kind of this, we want to play into this mindset where it's like, my cult is better than your cult type of situation. So it's not to say that cults are good or bad, but you just want to choose the right cult. And so it's like a tongue-in-cheek, we like to call it a cult, because it kind of is, given it's viewed as sort of crazy according to today's standards. But history has shown that today's novelties are tomorrow's norms.
The slogan "Don't die." At 19, have you spoke to anyone who's near death? Have you had anyone pass away that you're very, like, for me, the idea of death at 19 felt so far removed from my mindset at that age.
You feel like you have this infinite horizon.
100%.
You basically feel immortal.
Yeah.
You just feel like you won't die. And then as you age, you experience certain decline, physical, cognitive, and then it starts to approach. And so I can't say anything from that side of it because I haven't experienced that. But my grandpa, he started experiencing cognitive decline. And that was actually what initiated the plasma exchange, where my dad said to my grandpa, hey, there's been some evidence showing that when you put the plasma of a younger mouse into an older mouse, the older mouse was able to rejuvenate. And so he offered to do it with my grandpa, who said yes. And so they were going to do it together. And then my dad thought, why not include Talmage in this? And so he posed it to me and I said, yes, like, why? Of course. And so we did the world's first tri-generational plasma exchange.
What's the results from that?
So I gave my plasma to my dad, and between us, there wasn't much of an effect because he's already extremely healthy. But for my grandpa, his pace of aging going into it was that of a 75-year-old. So he aged at the same rate as a 75-year-old would age. And after the treatment, for a period of 6 months, his pace of aging reduced to that of a 45-year-old. So he would age at the rate of a 45-year-old.
And that lasted for 6 months?
6 months.
And then you have to do it again?
Yeah.
Do you get scared of doing these therapies? Because, I mean, a scientist, I think about, you do animal trials, you do mouse trials, and then you slowly start to see if you transfer them into human trials. And then once you've got enough human data, then you feel like it's safe enough to a certain degree to start trying this on people. I mean, this is literally taking it from a mouse model. So do you get scared on some treatments that you undergo? Because, I mean, gene therapy, I know you haven't done it, but Bryan's done it. And that's still quite early development. Do you worry, one, for your dad, maybe something going wrong? Is there anything that you fear when you're doing all of this?
Yeah, for him, it's oftentimes when we're trying to usher some large change in society, there typically has to be a few people or parties that are pushing at the frontier of it, because that's where you have to be to make real discovery. And so I view him as that person on the frontier that is doing these things that may seem risky. And I also have a lot of confidence in him because his models about reality are pretty robust. He and the team of doctors he's hired are very selective about what they do. And if the risk profile for something is too high, they don't do it. And so they do take a very structured and safety-oriented approach to things like that.
So it brings me into a question that I asked Bryan very early on. And I loved his honesty around it. And I wonder where he is now with it. But you're in a very different stage of your life. You're 19. So I was thinking when I was 19, I was dating, I was figuring out who I was. This is my personal experience, and I was experiencing relationships. What's that like? And two, having this protocol, what is relationships like for you as a 19-year-old?
I honestly have the best relationship with my dad, and it's so good that I don't feel as much of a need to fulfill other parts
A
of
romantic
relationships.
relationship.
Yeah,
Do you have any interest in, have you ever had a relationship?
I haven't had a serious relationship before. And the way I think about it is there's a common pattern where there's an expectation that people get into relationships. So you go to college, it's like who you're going to date, who's girlfriend, boyfriend, all this drama. And so it's a pattern that most people fall into. It's just a byproduct of how people have done things. And right now, I want to step back, see the pattern for what it is, and then choose if I want to stick with it or shake it off. And so I view that as a certain path to take. But right now for me, one of my biggest priorities is basically trying to build this thing. And so it's a lot of people fall into this social pressure to have relationships, and most relationships don't work out. They're very difficult relationships to find people who are compatible.
But isn't that the joy sometimes of like being young and figuring that out? So I guess when you maybe get into your 30s, you figure out actually who is that person that you want to be with, because you've experienced so many different types of personalities, characteristics. I think you learn the most about yourself in a relationship, as my previous experience. I think you can think you know yourself inside out, and then you're basically with someone else, and all the parts of you that you might switch off show up. You can't run away from them. They're there and you see them. And I feel like I've learned the most about myself through relationships. And I find, at your age, when you're younger and there's less pressure on a relationship, much less pressure, it's an interesting time to explore that. And I was wondering if that ever popped into your mind, the curiosity of it.
You're definitely right about a lot of things, where there's like this saying where before you marry someone, go on a road trip with them. Like that will reveal true colors. And so it's almost like relationships are a force function of sorts, where it reveals your strengths and weaknesses being with someone else. And so they definitely serve their purpose. They're amazing. And I think the thing in my specific case, I don't want to make generalizations about things, but when I look at it from my vantage point, I view myself I'm in a very unique position, and I have an ability to contribute to potentially one of the coolest things going on in the world right now. And I have an extraordinary relationship with my dad.
But that's not the same as a romantic relationship.
It's not necessarily the same, but romantic relationships are a way of experiencing some level of joy, or parental relationships are a different way of experiencing some level of joy. And I am choosing to follow a path that most people my age don't follow. And that may come off as weird to some or abnormal, and that's fine. But I'm trying to have the sobriety and self-awareness to basically see the situation for what it is, see the path, so we both acknowledge that it's important. We both acknowledge that it's hard.
I'm glad that you're not blocking it fully off. I think it's important in a life, maybe not a serious relationship at 19, but to be open to the idea of experience in that area.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that I am trying to push away or trying to proactively block, but rather something that I don't want to fall into a certain routine because everyone else has.
Well, I can very much feel that you are not somebody that wants to kind of like fit in a mold. And I feel that probably having a dad as Bryan Johnson,
Yeah, definitely has its perks.
you're not going to fit into the mold. You're going to want to like push boundaries, and that feels very exciting. I mean, it feels very exciting that you started this at such a young age to cultivate certain health data to see where you will be. I would love to see where the next 70 years of your life could go. Your dad always says that he wants to live to, well, he just doesn't want to die, so maybe I don't even give a number, but he wants to live to 130. What age would you like to live to?
Yeah, I think most people can't answer this question. Like, it's inherent for me. I can't say with any certainty how long I want to live. But the only thing that I can say with certainty, and that most people in the world can say with certainty, is that I want to live for tomorrow. And then when I get to tomorrow, I'll ask the question, do I want to live the next day? And typically we'll say yes. Because if you ask the question, do you want to live forever? It's the same question as, do you want to live tomorrow? Humans can't grapple the question of, do you want to live forever? And so the question of either forever or for tomorrow is the same thing. I don't want there to be a certain point where I want to say yes and I can't.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I know that our body will get to a certain age, and I'm pretty happy with making sure that I have a rich enough life that whenever that time goes, I feel like I've made the most of my life. I think that's like my viewpoint on longevity, that I want to make sure that I'm fulfilling and have no regrets. Mm-hmm. You know, as opposed to just living for tomorrow, making sure that I make the most of every day. But if somebody said, would you like to live to 100 or 110? I'm not sure how I'd answer that, because I want to know what my quality of life would be at that point.
Yeah. The thing about this question is that up until now, death has always been inevitable. And so when death is inevitable, we justify its existence. Since it's something that we can't control, we celebrate it. And so most religions are built around the idea of death and basically living your most fulfilled, high quality life right now so that it's all worth it in the end. But these are just stories that we tell ourselves. And we may be walking into a future where death may not be inevitable. And so if death is no longer inevitable, then all of the stories that
But then won't we just overpopulate? So, isn't that just like the story, like the circle of life, as Lion King would put it, you know, where we would become overpopulated and we couldn't cope?
Yeah, so that's an example of a justification of death.
I love that you just told me that and you're half my age.
Yeah. Yeah, so oftentimes we also...
But it's true, we would be overpopulated. Like, how would we survive on this planet if none of us died?
There's also this idea that oftentimes the problems that humans predict will be problems don't end up being problems. So one example is the horse manure problem, where people said that there's going to be too much. It was a couple 100 years ago, there's going to be too much horse manure, and then it was going to be an issue for everyone. And then the Ford Model T was invented. And then you basically had cars that replaced horses. And so that problem was solved. And so it just illustrates that a lot of the problems that we think are going to be problems aren't necessarily the problems that we do have.
So do you think we're going to go and live on Mars?
I don't know. And so, but it's a meaningful question to ask. If humans manage to basically defeat death or acquire the ability to prolong life at as much as we want, then it's likely that we've probably solved for the overpopulation problem. If we tackled such a difficult, complex task, then we've likely solved for other problems. So it's to basically say that
this is you, Talmage, that's going to have to solve this problem.
Maybe so. A lot of problems that we say are going to happen are oftentimes just projections of our current ways of thinking and are not indicative of what the future is going to be like at all.
So we just spoke about 3 pillars, right? We spoke about, well, we spoke about this earlier: sleep, nutrition, movement. All 3 core pillars. Something that I believe is really essential is self-kindness, which is a bit like self-compassion, your mindset, having that understanding within yourself to have that positive mindset, to have that cultivation that you are looking after oneself. And I think that's a really integral pillar, and the thing that I do a lot of work on. And I think having these pillars are great fundamentals. They're really important. But I think so much about what I've heard you speak about today is your mindset. And I believe this is the most underspoken about conversation in health, in longevity. And we can kind of tell people, if we look at public health guidelines, you gave me very like simplistic data on exercise. People know it, but they don't do it. People know that ultra-processed foods is killing them, but we still eat them. People are smart. We know what's good for us, really. We know that we should be getting sleep, but we don't. So I believe the mindset and the self-kindness within that is critical, because when we have that, we are less likely to beat ourselves up. We're less likely to judge ourselves. We're more likely to treat ourselves as we would a friend. And I would love that to be a part of the Blueprint protocol.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that a lot of the reason why, the reason why people aren't healthy is not the fault of the individual. It's the fault of society, that we basically prioritize these addictive algorithms that make us have unhealthy behaviors. And so when you're talking with someone, it's not their fault that they're not healthy. People are just a byproduct of their environment. And so one reason why I've been able to be so healthy and do this for so long is because I live in a family culture created by my dad that prioritizes sleep, diet, and exercise. And so you are who you surround yourself with and what you surround yourself with. And having that support system is infinitely helpful when becoming healthy. And so it's less of the individual's at fault and more of, we need to shift society's priorities and narratives so that we can promote this.
But it's more of a mindset with oneself. I think we can sit in a very critical mindset. Like, if somebody did make the wrong health decision, they'd beat themselves up and then say, oh, well, I've done that now, I might as well do this next thing. And I'm wondering if it's that kind of compassionate mindset that you have with yourself on, I deserve to be feeling my best.
Yeah. I went through the same process when I was first transitioning to Blueprint. I messed up so much. I had so many mess ups, and I regretted it. And then I hated myself for it. And I would say, I'm not doing this again. And then I did it again. And I did it 100 times. And throughout this whole process, my dad witnessed the whole thing. And he went through the exact same thing. And so he basically had this level of compassion for me. It's okay. This is not your fault. It's okay. This is going to take time. You got it. Just keep going at it. And I did. And I overcame it. And I was largely only able to because I had that support system. So yes, it is a mindset thing, 100%. And oftentimes, one of the best ways to facilitate that mindset is to have a support system or to have an environment or to be around people who have that compassion. Because if they're compassionate like that with you, you'll begin to have that compassion for yourself. It's very hard to self-start it. So it's not the individual's fault. It's very hard to shift how you think about it. How did
Bryan do it? He was his support system.
I think for him, he was depressed for 10 years and he basically wanted to kill himself every day. And so I think he hit such a low point that it forced him to make a complete 180 switch. He says this, but if it wasn't for having kids, he would have committed suicide. And so he's an impressive example of how someone did this alone. but most people can't do it alone. It was very hard for me to do it, and I had his help. So I don't think that we should tell people or ask that people do this by themselves. It's impossible. And so I think that's why it's so important to have community and support systems that basically reward positive health and provide the support to take better steps and provide that compassion like you were talking about.
We're not, from evolution, naturally wired to be compassionate. We're wired to be self-critical for survival methods, If we were all hyper-compassionate, we would have all been eaten by now. We're evolved to be self-critical, to be alert, to be on guard. And when somebody shows you compassion, it connects to empathy and it mirrors to you that it's okay. But we're not taught that when we're growing up. So that's why I think this is such a fundamental piece within the health model. So I'd love for you to come back to me if you will include that into your blueprint, because I think it sounded like that was a really important part of your transition. And I think maybe what people now see is the outcome. It's like when you're building anything, you don't see the transition, right? You don't see the hard parts. You don't see what you've struggled with. You see the outcome. And so I think having that part in there is human, right?
Being healthy is very hard. You don't have to go 100%. It's not an all or nothing game. It gives you permission to become healthier. And the one metaphor that I always like to go back to that resonates with me the most, and I think a lot of people, is that you don't need to have the perfect health in the world. You don't need to be incredibly disciplined. You don't need to not have any faults. You don't need to not make any mistakes. Like, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to mess up. It's inevitable. It's hard. But the most important thing is that you have 2 bowls of cereal instead of 3. That's it.
I never thought I'd hear the word cereal come out of your mouth.
It just did. Yeah.
When was the last time you ate cereal?
I can't remember. Yeah.
I'd love if you said last night.
Yeah. I think that it doesn't matter like what's happened or what your current state is. It just matters where you're going. And so don't focus on if you're successful right now or not. That's not a good indicator. Focus on the trajectory that you're putting yourself on. Even if it's incredibly small micro improvements, all that matters is that you get incrementally better. And if you fall down, that's okay. Like, we all fall down. Just keep on going. It's possible.
That was an answer to the last question that I always ask all my guests, which is, what does live well, be well mean to you?
Yeah. Live well, be well that's like an infinitely complicated question. Like, you could argue that more murder has occurred throughout history than any other reason, because difference in opinion about how to answer that question. Like,
what live well, be well?
I probably approach it from the idea that I want the ability to say yes to tomorrow and the ability to say yes to the next tomorrow, and just have that ability indefinitely. And it's not to say that I want to live forever, but it's to say that I want to have that control to opt in and say yes to life. And the best way for me to do that is to prioritize my health. And most people think that letting go of their vices will make life miserable and not worth meaning. And now, having been healthy, I have never been happier. And I want this to continue. I want to continue to say yes to tomorrow.
I think that's a great answer, to say yes to tomorrow. It's really interesting how your natural instinct to that question was so broad on a macro level, as opposed to just how you feel about it.
Yeah, it's like, can't help but basically see all questions as like, we're 99% NPCs. Like, everything I say is unoriginal. Like, most people are unoriginal. We're just Like we're just a reflection of everyone else around us, our culture, environment. And so I try to have some self-awareness that basically acknowledges like, yes, I'm an NPC, but also like even though I know I'm an NPC, here's an answer I would give with that frame of mind.
Yeah. I mean, we are. But I also think that so much, I mean, obviously sounds like we're all clones, but actually the richness of diversity of minds that are out there is quite incredible. I don't think there's many people that have sat in front with me that have had the same thought process. I asked that question to maybe over 300 people. No one's ever answered the same. And that's why I love asking that question. Because if it was such a easy question to answer, you'd get a very similar answer every time. And everyone sees how they see living well and being well totally different. And I think that is so much about what it is to be human, is to be different. Well, I wonder in a year's time if you'd answer it the same.
I would be.
This is your data point, right here.
Well, I'll check in with you a year from now.
Yeah. I can't wait. Well, thank you so much, Talmage, for coming on.
This has been amazing conversation.
For being open, for being honest, for being vulnerable, for being incredibly smart at 19, self-aware, and for doing all this publicly. I have a lot of admiration. So I very much look forward to where you'll be in a year.
Thanks. Yeah, you asked very good questions that definitely probe the surface.
Thank you. I appreciate
thank
that.
you.
Thank you, Talmage.
Cool.
That was great.